Okay, so I decided to call this presentation Disclosure of Identity because Law of One really strongly emphasizes that everything is identity, all is one. If you ask the question, who am I? The answer is the universe. All is one, all is identity, it's you. They say the universe, its mystery unbroken, is one. Always begin in the end in the creator, not in technique. So we get caught up in a lot of different things that are the process of living a life and doing things, and it's all just a kind of a distraction in some sense from ultimately what we are as one. How many people are not familiar with the Law of One material at all? Okay, very few people, that's good. How many people are not familiar with general principles like that second density of consciousness would be considered like animals, third density is people, fourth density is where we're headed? How many people are not familiar with that kind of thing? Okay, very, very few people. I already have a presentation on YouTube. If you just type in Law of One into YouTube, it comes up near the top with the same purple background. So you can learn a lot more too through my other presentation, which is more of a general overview of a lot of the ideas. But yeah, the basic idea here is this was 5 books that were produced from 1981 to 1984, which are basically 106 channeling sessions with the being that identifies itself as Ra. Jim McCarty is the only surviving member currently of the original team. Carla Ruckert and Don Elkins were doing the question and answers. Carla Ruckert would be in a trance state, channeling Ra. Don Elkins was asking the questions. And Don Elkins died in 1984, and that kind of put an end to the material. But there's an awful lot there still that you can find at lawofone.info. And you can also now, as of like 2013, you can purchase the MP3s of the original audio that they recorded everything onto cassette tapes and have finally released it all onto the internet. So, it's stunning validation that they actually did what they said they did. They did not edit the material, except in small ways they edited Don's questions because he was fumbling around trying to figure out what to ask. But Ra is always channeling precise, perfect language. It's just surreal to listen to these actual tapes and see it. And I would say the lawofone.info has slightly more close version of the material than would the books that you can buy. It's very, very close, 99% verbatim to what's on the audio, and I verified that personally, so you know it's legit when you look at lawofone.info. That's what was actually being channeled. The first time I gave a presentation on this, I didn't really say much about Corey Goode at all, but since 2015, when I first gave a presentation on this topic, Corey Goode has come out and said the Blue Avians have now absolutely confirmed that they were responsible for the creation of the Law of One series. And so this is actually very significant for people who are interested in validating Corey in some way, because the Law of One is filled with highly specific statements that have falsifiable elements. So people have complained if you want to falsify something, you need a lot of details. And the Law of One is packed full of details if you're interested in diving in more to the connections, the correlations, and possible contradictions, of which I found none with Corey Goode's testimony. And believe me, there's a lot of people out there who are saying a lot of crazy things that do actually contradict many specifics in the Law of One. But it's important to consider maybe we're misinterpreting something or other, not dismiss people blanketly because one thing that we believe doesn't fit with something they're saying. But who am I actually? I'm actually a programmer, a bachelor's degree from University of California, Irvine. I'm a freelancer right now. I specifically became a freelancer, quit my full-time job so that I'd have more time to be more ambitious with what I'm involved in. I did a web agency kind of work for 5 years, and I gained all types of skills that way. So I'm able to help Corey. I do help Corey a little bit with websites and things. I started a meetup group in Colorado Springs called ET Disclosure and Contact. If you live in Colorado Springs or Denver, you can go visit that. We do an awful lot of interesting things with that group. We've done some protests, and one of them showed up on Corey Goode's Facebook page. A lot of people know me through this. He said several months ago when I was being briefed by the Air Force officer we call Sigmund, I was asked to please have my team stop, quote, harassing the personnel at a certain Air Force base in Colorado. I told him none of my team was harassing any of the Air Force bases. Sigmund looked at me with a scowl on his face. Now I know why. And he finally watched this video back on July 1st. I think it was when you first saw the video. Yeah, and he said, I recently found out that some of the people I'm working with were handing out flyers and holding up signs about the secret space program at a local Air Force base. When I found out about this, I had to chuckle a bit. So also, My friend here, Lotus, is in the video. He's working on a flyer for you guys, actually. I hope we can get that out. On Monday, we'll be announcing more things. Me and Roger will be announcing more things, including the nature of what we're doing as a Full Disclosure Project organization. We have not become a nonprofit, or I should say a 501c3 organization yet, but that's the direction we're definitely headed. And so hopefully we can announce more about what that will look like, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what we want you to be doing and potentially forming local chapters of the Full Disclosure Project to work in a similar manner on pushing full disclosure in your communities in whatever way you can. And what I did to just get started was just create a simple meetup group on meetup.com, and anybody can do that. It's not that hard. And we'll give you some more ideas on Monday too, many more ideas about what you can be doing locally. I created a website called the newearth.network as an alternative to meetup.com. So if you can't afford meetup.com, or actually I would recommend trying out both sites because more of us who are here are going to hear what I'm saying and go to newearth.network, and you can find people like you if you go to newearth.network. I have it separated into it's kind of like a social network, but it's also kind of like separated into regions that you can go drill down by regions that are the same as on Craigslist right now. And so you can go to your specific region, and I have an API, a programming thing that pulls in meetup groups that are already occurring in your area on meetup.com. So it's kind of a mixture of meetup.com and Craigslist that you can figure out what's going on, find people that you know or that you are like in your area and become friends with them. That definitely helps for pushing disclosure forward when we get together with people that we know. So this is a little bit about me, but the question of who am I can't actually honestly answer. I have no idea who I am. I have no idea what I am. I'm not sure what it means to exist. I'm as lost as you are. I know nearly nothing. And the law of one kind of asks us to think about this, asks us to make identity and our infinite potential is a kind of a question of continual asking. And this is the way I kind of look at it. As your name is a fiction, I call myself Mike, it's a fiction, that it kind of points back to who I think I am. Who you actually think you are is also a fiction that serves as a pointer back to the one infinite creator, who you really are. So everything is kind of what the law of one will call a distortion of the truth about our oneness. So further disclaimers, just to make this clear. These are just my opinions that I'm going to be talking about, my interpretations. I may state things as though I think they're facts, even though I should be questioned. I'm no authority. My opinions are not the opinions of Full Disclosure Project, not the opinions of Corey Good, L&L Research, or anybody. This is just me putting something together for you. And you should verify for yourself by reading the material, make sure I'm accurate. And if I say something that sounds wrong, it doesn't vibe with you, I might just be getting it wrong, and maybe you should go read the material and verify that it's actually the way I say it is, because it might not be. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, this is kind of an extension of what Jordan was saying. So we have basics of disclosure that we know about, extraterrestrial presence, the numbers and variety of ETs, the technology that's been hidden, the science that's been hidden, the truth about our history, what's been hiding from us by human corruption. But this can also lead to a broader philosophical disclosure about what's really going on with the nature of reality. And there will be an inevitable gap for people who are strongly in a materialistic frame of mind, thinking about everything in terms of building blocks. But the universe doesn't quite work that way. And a bigger disclosure becomes possible when people start recognizing that there is truth behind consciousness science, like psychic phenomenon. It's a very strange thing for materialists to get around, that we have psychic abilities. And we have to be kind of prepared to talk about the philosophy of how the universe really works, because a lot of people are going to be very confused and razzled by this. Also, scientific evidence of the possible spiritual purpose behind all of our progress. It's not just random chaos, even though it looks like it. There could actually be a meaning, a goal, and a purpose for everything we see happening. And that's something people are going to inevitably start to ask more about. And it's very important in some ways if people are becoming afraid of the possibility of something negative out there that they don't understand, fear of the unknown, fear of something that looks dark. If you can emphasize there appears to be a grand spiritual purpose to everything, that can really help alleviate people's concerns. Of course, it starts to sound religious, so you have to have some kind of scientific backing, but that's part of what disclosure is. It's part about the merging science and spirituality. And the law of one is very, very helpful with that. I kind of think ET disclosure is kind of like a gateway drug. People are going to start asking a lot of questions. How much of our science fiction could actually be real? And what did religion specifically get right and wrong about the mysteries of the universe? What do the extraterrestrials themselves believe about spirituality and religion? This was a huge question for me when I first started researching. And what do the extraterrestrials actually want us to know? And do different extraterrestrial groups have different ideas, different messages about what they want us to know? What are the upper limits of our technology? If this crazy stuff is true, I mean, how far do we take it? Is time travel possible? And if time travel is possible, and we can go back into the past and help ourselves in the past and grow more in the past through having gone back, what does it even mean to progress if it's not a time-based thing? What is progression really about? And the law of one obviously says things like, your higher self is you in your future, and you are already coming back in the past to help yourself out. And that's part of how we grow. It's not a linear thing. It's like an all-at-once event that's just looking in a linear way to help us learn lessons. But anyway, we also are going to have to ask the questions about how many beings interact with our thoughts if we're all psychic, and if the mind can exist outside the body, why are we even in a body? What's the purpose of the body versus the mind? And what are we if we're not strictly material? And can we detect the soul with technology? It's possible that's been done. And can technology interface with the soul? Is that what advanced spiritual beings do to help us reincarnate? To give us what would appear to be near-death experiences? And are souls fundamentally separate from each other, or are they fundamentally all the same thing? These are questions people will have to ask. So how do UFO researchers traditionally tackle some of these questions? Well, we obviously have field investigations, interviews with people who have been contacted. We have interviews with people who are whistleblowers, people who know something about the workings of government, military work. We have hypnosis work. A lot of people are understanding you can just put somebody in an altered state of consciousness and get information, and then that leads into channeling and meditation information. And we also have direct research into new science and technology, which helps us understand more about the nature of reality. And it turns out Don Elkins was involved in all these areas in some sense. And Don Elkins was one of the greatest UFO researchers to ever live, in my opinion. And he doesn't get the credit he deserves. He was really just a professor originally. Started out, he got a PhD in philosophy, but he was working as a professor of physics and engineering at the University of Louisville, Kentucky for 12 years. And it was during his time as a professor, relatively early on in his time as a professor, he started doing hypnosis on people and doing all this types of esoteric research. And eventually he started going around to interview contactees. And in 1965, he left his position as a professor specifically to get involved more heavily in UFO research. And so he became a Boeing pilot, a 7027 pilot, to help give himself more time. He also bought planes and would fly around with his own, or rent planes and fly around so that he could cheaply get to the people who are having these contact experiences. I mean, that's the main reason he's flying around a plane, is to go interview people about their contact experiences. So he was really on top of things. And finally, after many years of doing this kind of thing with Carla Ruckert and working on channeling with her, that's when the Law of One began. It was like when he was at his peak of understanding from all the research he had done, then Ra comes in. You're ready to hear some of this. And it was by far more specific, coherent, intelligent than anything else he had seen before. And he could just have a normal conversation back and forth with Ra. What's the nature of reality? And I'll quickly mention that a book was recently released. Carla Ruckert passed away in 2015, but shortly before she died, Gary Bean, who's the director of LL Research, the nonprofit associated with the Law of One Material, Gary Bean did many, many extensive interviews with Carla Ruckert and Jim McCarty, Carla's now husband, or then husband. And this book, I recommend, has a lot of insight into their lives and everything that's going on with them. One of the things Carla says in this book is that Don did absolutely everything he could think of. He went to seances, he went to channeling sessions, he investigated anything that was other than, quote, normal science. And they investigated hard UFO cases together wherever he could get with his airplanes. And Carla says he felt from the very beginning that this is all just an illusion and spirit is the reality. He kind of had that sense from the very beginning. He thought channeling was very interesting because it indicated that there are others from elsewhere that had kindly thoughts toward us, even though he discovered much later they're not all such nice guys. But Carla said she thinks his first piece of the puzzle was really realizing the information he sought wasn't going to come from here because this is just an illusion. It's necessary to seek beyond scientific limits if you want the truth. And so, I won't cover this. There's so many things about the law of one. David Wilcock has said, even just last on Wednesday, I think I heard bits and pieces of his interview with Jimmy Church. Just listen to that if you want to know more about the nature of the validation of material. And I want to point out a few things about it, though, that people inevitably who are skeptical will bring up, which is like, oh, of course, this was Don Elkins' thing. Even though people, when they talk about the law of one, they often just say, oh, it was a David Wilcock's thing. No, it's nothing to do with the creation of the law of material. It was Don Elkins, but there's almost no way, when you listen to these audio tapes, Don Elkins could have been creating this stuff. And I'll give you an example. It's very fascinating to me. So a good portion of session 8 of the material, very early on, was not put in book 1. And a good portion of this was about the secret space program. They said that there were United States-derived UFO manufacturing underground plants in Mexico and New Mexico, and these UFO devices had psychotronics and particle beam weaponry on them, and that there are bases of ours on the moon, bases under the oceans, bases in the sky, and this was omitted from the original Law of One book until book 5 in 1998, way after Don died, with the original audio coming out then in 2013. And Don Elkins is actually quite emotional in this audio, if you listen to it. And to me, it's like the best acting performance you could put on. For him to put on such an acting performance, I don't think would have been something he would just leave out. But this is a quote from session 8. Ra was actually kind of accusing him, like, well, not accusing, but suggesting that they pursue more philosophy and less of the specifics. But Don just kept questioning because he's like, this is really hard. This particular information is so startling to me, so startling that it makes me question your validity on this. Up until this point, I was in agreement with everything you're saying. He didn't think it was possible that the United States government could have been developing all these UFO craft and that they were doing this much in a secret space program. So in a sense, you know, the way people react to Corey Goode is the way Don Elkins was reacting to Ra about the secret space program. Like, I just can't deal with it. This is something I'm considering leaving out of the book entirely, which he then did. And there's also, obviously, a lot of people try to claim that Ra is probably like some negative entity. Of course, all channeling is negative, which is kind of ridiculous because it's like one of the most uplifting and positive things. But the most striking thing about it, I don't know if I've seen this in other channel material, it's only question and answer. Ra doesn't give any type of lecture or discourse on anything. They don't have an agenda. That's not the way they work. Well, there was one statement that's an exception to this I'll cover, but they only respond to questions. And you look right here, you can go into law-of-one.info, go to the opening statements, raw contact opening statements category, and you see listed out all the statements they made that were not coming from questioning. The first thing they said, I greet you in the love and the light of one infinite creator. We communicate now. And they waited for a question. They said nothing more. They waited for questions, and that was the only way they were willing to talk. And that's a very karmically pure way of going about it. It does not infringe on free will. But there was one statement that's the exception to that. That's in session 1. Question, or the answer 1. It was not an answer because there wasn't a question. They said in the opening statements that they're part of the Confederation of Planets in the service of the infinite creator, and they have only one important statement, All things, all of life, all of the creation is part of one original thought. And interestingly, they kind of gave an exercise right after that. They said, let us for a moment consider thought. What is it, my friends, to take thought? Took you then thought today? That's kind of a joke, I think. What thoughts did you think today? What thoughts were part of the original thought today? And how many of your thoughts did the creation abide? Was love contained and was service freely given? You are not part of a material universe. You are part of a thought. You are dancing in a ballroom in which there is no material. You are dancing thoughts. You move your body, your mind, and your spirit in somewhat eccentric patterns, for you have not completely grasped the concept that you're part of the original thought. There's a lot to unpack here, and I'll do that a little bit more, but I didn't put enough emphasis in my previous presentations on their most important statement, which I wanted to do today. So identity seems to be what we are, as I mentioned before. They say all things are one, there's no polarity, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. And that one is love, light, light, love, the infinite creator. And they very often combine words like this, love, light, to show that they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Even though one might look more like love than light when you're showing love with somebody or turning on a light switch, it's all part of the same thing. It should be understood that any portion, no matter how small, of any density or illusory pattern contains, as in a holographic picture, the one creator, which is infinity. Thus, all begins and ends in mystery. This is another thing I want to point out today, is the strong emphasis on mystery, and that Ra doesn't even really know what's really going on at the fundamental roots of the universe, or I should say the multiverse. So I want to talk about everything today a little bit in terms of the central question of identity, but I'll cover a lot of different interesting things today. And I want to point out, I coincidentally came across this video earlier this year on YouTube. It's titled Talks on Sri Ramana Maharshi, narrated by David Godman, on self-inquiry. And I realized after thinking about this and practicing some of Ramana Maharshi's teachings that it's kind of like the first statement in the Law of One. Self-inquiry is essentially what Ra is recommending for us in this initial exercise. But let me talk about Ramana Maharshi's version of self-inquiry. It was his basic thesis that the individual is nothing more than a thought. Does that sound familiar? But he called it the I thought. And I would prefer to call it the I assumption. He said if one can break the connection between the I thought and the thoughts that it identifies with, all the stuff going on around us, then the I thought, or you could even say the ego, itself will subside and finally disappear. He recommended one should constantly or even relentlessly question oneself. Who am I? Where does this I come from? This is from a book by David Godman. And I'll talk about this practice a little bit more here. I got to go back. There was a suggestion that we're often too lost in the objects of our experiences and not the subject of our experiences. We interpret things in terms of our ego, and we don't question the ego. We assume that we know who we are and what we are, and that's the reason for all the things that we're doing. But there's a suggestion, if you go back inward and always question, well, who is the I that is thinking these thoughts? And what is it that thinks your thoughts, and what is it that experiences your perceptions? What is it that's asking those questions? Ramana Maharshi suggests that the sense of ego is really a fiction, and it needs to be questioned. And all suffering stems from false assumptions about your personal identity. The false ego cannot survive under great scrutiny because it was never real, and it can never be ultimately pinned down as a separate self. You go inward and you continuously question, who am I? What is experiencing that thing? What is experiencing that thought? And if you can do that in meditation, you can totally eradicate the ego very quickly. In my opinion, if you properly ask and really drill into yourself and your false sense of self, which is, I agree with this, seems to be the root of suffering. Thanks. So in this sense, I would suggest looking for the questions is more important than looking for the answer. So let's look at what the questions were that Ra asked again. Let us for a moment consider thought. What is it, my friends, to take thought? Took you then thought today? What thoughts did you think today? How many times do we actually go back and look at our thoughts? It's very important to try meditating and thinking about what thoughts we thought. What thoughts were part of the original thought today? This is kind of trippy. They're asking us to kind of see if our thoughts came from something. Where did our thoughts actually come from? Did we originate them? Are they part of some other flow of consciousness that's streaming into us? Are these thoughts a distortion of something more pure? And how many of your thoughts did the creation abide? And this is asking us to look at everything as one thing, even our thoughts. And the next few questions are quite interesting. The next question is, was love contained? And I would say this is like a tip for the process of self-inquiry. Law of One talks a lot about love. They describe love as the second distortion where awareness is the first distortion, or they say the free will is the first distortion. So love is the primal energy that creates, they say it's the energy of an extremely higher order that may be seen to be an object rather than an activity by some, and worshipped as the creator even, instead of unity or oneness. But that it's this fundamental infinite energy that created everything. And I would suggest that looking for love in your thoughts is a way back to your true identity because of the fundamental primal nature of love. So focusing on love in your thoughts is a way of getting back to who you really are. So the most nearly centered and usable exercise they suggest for us, the most useful or usable exercise, is to recognize that the moment contains love. And that's the lesson of this illusion or density. This exercise they ask us to perform is to consciously seek that love and awareness and understanding at every moment that we can. And they also asked in the beginning, was service freely given in those thoughts? They talk a lot about chakras too. They call them energy centers. And they say, the heart center, you got red, orange, yellow. Yellow ray is we're often dealing with other people. We're stuck in our thoughts about ego and others. Sometimes if you're trying to manipulate people, that's a distortion, that's a blockage in your yellow. And they say in order to completely unblock yellow ray, you should love all which are in relationship to you with hope only of the other self's joy, peace, and comfort. This is to completely unblock yellow ray, which maybe none of us have done yet. But that's the trick. Hope only of the other self's joy, peace, and comfort. And they say the best way to achieve service to others is the constant attempt to seek to share the love of the Creator as it is known to the self without hesitation. Without hesitation. And this will look different for everybody in the specific third density illusions. But there's an added point here, which I'm guessing many people are thinking about, which is that, hey, if I'm giving free love all the time without limits, I could be trampled on. This is often criticized as not wise by others, and even discussed in the law of one as not necessarily representing the path of wisdom. If we're always freely loving without any form of limits. But the principle of a metaphysical law, that the energy centers, the energy system of our body and our mind is flowing through our ability to unblock and freely, in a totally without hesitation manner, share love with the hope of other selves, joy, peace, and comfort. This is the metaphysical principle that allows us to actually grow spiritually and have a healthy energy flow. But they talked about Jesus quite a bit as an example of unbridled compassion. And this is somewhat controversial to go into the specifics of what they said here, but I want to explain it a little bit. The reason that they were talking about Jesus in some cases was because Carla Ruckert was close to death when she was doing some of these channeling sessions. She was really, really pushing herself, and something really weird was happening where she would lose a lot of her body weight. She was just losing weight constantly, and she was down to skin and bones at some points, and it was really hard for her to put on weight. She tried everything she could to put on weight, and something about giving over her body to this powerful entity to sort of use it to this perfect purpose was so draining that it was causing, or at least other health issues were becoming more pronounced. It wasn't creating health issues, it was accentuating pre-existing health conditions. But so they were asking her, do you really want to be a martyr? Do you really want to kill yourself? We'd prefer you be alive. You should think about this a little bit more. But Jesus was a martyr. When Jesus decided to return to Jerusalem for the holy days of its people, it turned from the work of mixing love and wisdom and embraced martyrdom, which they call the work of fourth density love, without wisdom, which they call the fifth density understanding. I shouldn't use the word understanding, I should just use the word wisdom, because they say this was the greatest amount of understanding possible. This was compassion extended to its fullest perfection, and you can observe the greatest amount of understanding exhibited by Jesus. He was indeed capable of the greatest amount of understanding, as he felt that and knew that the hour had come for that to be fulfilled, which was its incarnation. It was his purpose to do what he did, and he knew it. So they do distinguish between understanding and wisdom, which is a little bit confusing, but they also say, if you search for the word misnomer in Law of One, you see mostly the word understanding when they say, we apologize for this misnomer, because they're trying to emphasize, we don't really understand hardly anything in this illusion that we're in, and wisdom and understanding actually relatively are far beyond our grasp. We're dealing with words which are like guesses compared to what they say we get in fourth and fifth density. But they say Carla was aware of certain overbalances toward love, even to martyrdom, and they say that this unbridled compassion does not have any fault, but they affirm its perfection, and it is an example of love which has served as a beacon to many. So it's a valid path to love others to the point of death. But for those who seek further, the consequences of martyrdom must be considered, for in martyrdom lies the end of opportunity. the density of the martyr to offer love and light. Each entity must seek its deepest path, which is different for everybody. They say, when they're talking about the archetype that is referred to the experience of the mind in the tarot deck, I think it's the Emperor card. They refer to the fact that there is a bit of protection that we get when we look in terms of love, but it's not a physical kind of thing. Those people on the service to others path do not experience the outward shelter in your illusion from the gusts, flurries, and blizzards of quick and cruel catalyst, which we're always facing. However, to the pure, all that is encountered speaks of the love and the light of the one infinite creator. The cruelest blow is seen with an ambiance of challenges offered and opportunities to come. Thusly, the great pitch of light is held high above such a person that all interpretation may be seen to be protected by light. And that's actually the meaning of this little ball here in his hand. There's so, in book 4 of the material, they get so far into the symbolism of what everything in some of these images means. You see this guy's looking over to our right or his left. That means it's the left-hand path for him. The right-hand path is the path of service to others. Left-hand path is the path of service to self. So we tend to be more focused in that direction. We put up our guard a little bit more over in that direction. But ultimately, the magic is over here, sometimes hiding just behind our eyes, just behind our line of sight when we open to love. Okay, so this is a complicated game that we're in. We have what could be called negative entities, and they mess with us, they tempt us. And this is something people don't like to talk about a little bit, but to get a balanced perspective, you have to be aware of the potential of a kind of adversary that's pushing you to grow. And they talked about, many times in the Love One, they'd ask about, why is this negative thing happening to us right now? And the answer would usually be, oh, it's your fifth density negative friend. They would use the word friend. I don't know if it was Don Elkins introduced the word friend. They just wanted to make fun of it a little bit. But this was like the powerful dark entity that was kind of always after them, trying to stop them from doing this material. And they would say they normally just put out the fourth density minions. They called them the minions that would go out and tempt people. And the normal process of psychically attacking people is to tempt us away from polarization towards service to others, tempting us towards the aggrandizement of the self, or tempting towards aggrandizement of social organizations with which the self identifies. So I feel like that's a very key point, is that there's a sense of identity which is behind the deception. So stop identifying with all these things which are not you, which are not love, which are not the creator, and we can be more protected. They say nearly all of us, nearly all positive channels and groups may be lessened in their positivity or rendered quite useless by what we may call the temptations offered by the fourth density negative thought forms. They may suggest many distortions towards specific information, and that's very interesting. What kind of specific thing are you harping on with anyone who's having an argument with you? Distortions towards the aggrandizement of the self, distortions towards the flowering of your organization in some political, social, or fiscal way. So if anybody's going to start an organization of any kind, be aware of this. There's temptations being offered relating to the flowering of the organization in some political, social, and fiscal way. These distortions all remove the focus from the one infinite source of love and light, which we are all messengers, humble and knowing that we, of ourselves, are but the tiniest portion of the Creator, a small part of a magnificent entirety of infinite intelligence. But protection is very easy. They say give thanksgiving for each moment. See the self and the other self as creator, which is kind of process of asking, who am I really? Well, I'm the creator. Open the heart, always know the light and praise it. This is all the protection necessary. And they say love is the great protector. So let's go a little bit more interesting with the concept of love and what we're doing. If you search for the word politics in the Love One, you'll see only 2 references, and this is the one I want to talk about. People who are very active in attempting to remake or alter society are working from feelings of being correct personally or having the answers, and this is not necessarily from the heart, but the people who are of the heart, who are working to alter society, working from the green ray, the heart center, there are few of us. Very few, oh no, very few, they're just few, due to the understanding, may we say, of fourth ray, the heart, the compassion of fourth density, the understanding that universal love freely given is more to be desired than principalities or even the rearrangement of peoples or political structures. It's talking about like elections and voting and political systems. Universal love freely given is more to be desired. That does not say that there are no people working from their hearts towards politics, but we can be among the few who are doing that if we remember to seek love first. We still need to make sure we get disclosure. Oh my gosh. The technology your peoples possess at this time is capable of resolving each and every limitation which plagues your social memory complex at this present nexus of experience. And this is how we serve others through disclosures, making sure people can get what they need. We can heal the plagues of our social memory complex, which is another way of saying our entire society. There's also this other angle, which is that we have ETs who do interact with us to help us out with everything, and Rock identified themselves as a member of 53 civilizations, which comprise approximately 500 planetary consciousnesses in the Confederation of Planets in Service of the Infinite Creator. And they say the most efficient mode of contact that the Confederation is making is what they're experiencing, which was channeling, because the infringement upon free will is greatly undesired. But there are wanderers, the star seeds, souls from elsewhere, who will be able to have so-called close encounters and meetings between these higher density beings and the individuals. But they say if you want to make sure what's going on, if there's fear and doom in your contact experience, the contact was quite likely of a negative nature. And if the result is hope, friendly feelings, and the awakening of a positive feeling of purposeful service to others, the marks of Confederation contact are evident. So obviously, if we're feeling good about the contact, that's a good sign. But as soon as fear and doom start to creep in, then question it. There's close encounters that they talk about. They gave us some examples. They gave an example of a guy named Morris. Something strange happened where some of his friends were negatively contacted by negative extraterrestrials, and that somehow gave some kind of permission for the positive ET that Morris was associated with to come in and give him an experience. And an inner voice alerted him to go by itself to another place away from his friends, and there an entity with a thought form shape, a being appeared, and this being appeared and gazed at him, thus awakening in Morris the desire to seek the truth of this occurrence and of the experiences of its incarnation in general. The feeling of being awakened or activated is the goal. The goal of this contact is the feeling of being awakened or activated. And this, the way we're actually activated depends on our subconscious expectations to a certain extent. If we're expecting more physical contact, we might get more physical contact. As a preparation for this, I went ahead and was like, I want to know actually how many people actually think like us, and I commissioned a survey. You can do this with Google surveys. I paid for 500 people to answer a survey. This is very, very scientific, statistical way that's been validated. And I'm confident in this kind of data is being accurate statistically. I asked the question to people, do you believe extraterrestrials are currently interacting with humanity? We got 10% yes, around 12% in the category, or I should say around 20% in the category, I'm not really sure. And then 40% no, 30% this is ridiculous. So we've got a lot of work to do here. But there's a deeper point here, which is that this is not fundamentally a problem of science, where somebody's like, well, I just haven't seen the data yet. This is a problem of attitude. This is a spiritual thing. We got a lot of people out there who are just like, nah. They're not open to being nice about hearing your information. It's a tough job, but it is a spiritual war that we're in. I want to point out, interestingly, that Jacques Vallée had an interesting approach to the UFO topic. He would ask, well, what is the effect ultimately of the UFO topic? We've got all these people who are looking crazy. That's kind of what's happening. And it's not really helping with the scientific end of things. Terence McKenna said, well, all these people who look crazy, there's nothing wrong with being taken for a fool, except it does seal the phenomenon rather nicely away from the very sober ladies and gentlemen who are making these careers, their careers in some branch of science. So we can't exactly expect science to be the answer to a lot of what we're dealing with, at least in the modern sense. But this is a whole part. Ra suggests that this is really a fundamental point, actually, that they're here to inspire mystery, a sense of mystery, not a sense of understanding and putting it into a box, a sense of mystery and blowing wide open your boxes. They say there's 7 races from the Confederation currently interacting with us, and they want us to become aware of infinity. That's why they're doing it. The purposes are very simple, to allow these entities to become aware of infinity, which is often best expressed to the uninformed as the mysterious or the unknown. When we first developed the nuclear device, there was some extra contact that occurred in such a way as to cause mystery to occur. The hope for intention being to make your peoples aware of infinite possibility. It's not to necessarily send a very specific message, it's just to say, you don't really know what's going on, do you? Well, let's ask the question. If we already did know extraterrestrials are real, would there be a reason if they showed up? Well, in the Egyptian era, basically, they did show up and showed everyone themselves. And Don asked, why is that? And they said, well, it didn't make any difference. The belief systems of people were not affected dramatically by contact back then. Everyone just kind of knew that there were gods. But that didn't matter because the purpose was still to encourage and inspire studies in the mystery of unity. And that was the purpose for appearing to the Atlanteans. They had reached a level of philosophical understanding where they could probably deal with this kind of contact, and they were given the message or messages that led them to mystery and unity and greater study in that direction. So the mystery is the goal, both before disclosure and after disclosure. It teaches us about infinite possibility, and that's kind of the point. I think I have to go faster, actually, to get through everything. I Googled this a year ago. I was like, how many people are talking about reverence with religion? There's only 2 results for most reverent religion on Google. I thought this was kind of odd. And I feel like, we need a more humble attitude. And we've kind of been stuck thinking what we know. Everyone just is stuck thinking and trying to know and say, oh, this is what I think. And then they do it with kind of assertive attitude. Oh, I'm pretty sure because this is the information that was available to me. And therefore this and that is true. But the UFO disclosure is ultimately about waking us up to the fact that we don't know. And the sense of mystery is what's missing. It's going to help us have a very balanced process of disclosure and awakening, because we can open our hearts and our minds more easily when we're not so sure of anything. So assuming that we know is not the right attitude, Ra actually says that it's important to graduate, to ascend, to realize you do not understand. That's a crazy, trippy quote. You do not understand. If you think and you understand, that's holding you back. They also say the law of one is not even necessary for us to be consciously aware of. Opening the heart is what we need, not necessarily being aware of this or that. Ra tried repeatedly to help people become more ready, and they tried the pyramids, and it was somewhat unsuccessful, but they say they're of the brothers and sisters of sorrow. That's the way they look at who they're working with and what they're doing. We're operating out of a sense of sorrow, and if they can even help one person through their actions, then they see no concept of failure. They say their very being is hopefully a poignant example of both the necessity and near hopelessness of attempting to teach, because we're kind of not getting the lesson. And it's so hard to get through to people. And Ra even says there's many mysteries of the universe that they have not figured out yet. The portions of 7th density, there's 6th density, the portions of the 7th density remain mysterious to them. And the 8th density moves in a mystery they do not plumb. They don't even bother trying to explain that. They even don't understand totally the nature of time. They understand that ultimately there is no past or future. They say that the cycle of completion, there exists only the present. We still seek to learn this understanding. We hope to get to the point of no past or future, but existing in the all. Ra only assumes that there's infinite universes. They don't know for sure. We cannot speak it from knowledge of all the creations. We know only that they are infinite. We assume an infinite number of octaves, which is the 8 series of densities which the universe is structured under, or the multiverse is structured under. There's many, many universes that are calling octaves. And they say that it's been impressed on us that there is a mystery-clad unity of creation which all consciousness periodically coalesces and again begins. And it shall be understood that any portion of the Creator is part of a holographic picture, which is infinity. So I wanted to point out this interesting idea, because Corey Good came along and said, well, they claim it to be 6th to 9th density, and well, the 8th density is the next universe, and the 9th density is the next universe, according to this. But Ra actually talked about this idea in the Law of One, that there are beings from the other universes that are showing up. They say the best way to understand this is to look at the different universes as islands. And, if you're stranded on an island, you're alone, and if you have no way to get off the island, you do not know about other islands until an entity comes along from the other islands and says, I am from elsewhere. This is a rough analogy of what's going on. We have evidence of this sort both of previous creation and creation to be, meaning there's a universe before our universe, there's also beings from there. Or at least our beings are going to that. I don't understand how that works. We, in the stream of space-time and time-space, are viewing these as non-simultaneous events, which is really trippy because it's like they think the universe is one event, and so now there's multiple events on another layer, and everything is coalescing. So I'm wondering if the timelines are being altered to accelerate the coalescence of universes, which is something that they say seems to be happening. That's kind of beyond our practical application. They refer to something called the harvest as an anomalous activity. And I want to talk about the word harvest because it's been getting a lot of flack in the New Age community, like, no, don't use the word harvest, that sounds creepy. They also call it graduation. It's not the only word. They say the anomaly of harvest is when an event happens to transfer our indigo body into violet ray manifestation, which is the crown chakra. And this is not something I totally understand, but it could be something where it's like we're supercharged for a brief moment that allows us to reconfigure ourselves, and this might not even happen when we're alive. They also refer to the idea that third density bodies give birth to fourth density bodies. There is a transition period to fourth density. It's not like it's all going to happen with one thing, but there could be one thing that is called the harvest that's going to happen. And this helps us understand what further teachings are necessary for each individual and what further incarnations are necessary for each individual. It's about figuring out the next stage of our experience. So why do they call it a harvest? And people don't always realize this, but this is almost certainly a reference to the biblical prophecy, that they're trying to connect the dots. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 13. They say Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field, but while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat. So the idea of harvest is when the harvesters come and finally at the end of the age, they separate the good and the bad, or the neutral. They make sure that I will tell the reapers to bind in bundles and gather the wheat into my barn. So that's basically the idea of harvest, is gathering the good stuff out from the chaos of the current reality, which is necessary to allow people to grow. But Jesus was uniquely clarifying the harvesters are angels, and angels is obviously the only word they had for extraterrestrials. So one of the most profound things that you can find there is that there are beings who show up at the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels, the people helping us with the harvest. And an interesting thing he said, what happens at the end of the age is that the righteous will shine forth like the sun. And the reason a lot of Bibles have this uppercase is because it's referring to the Old Testament. Not only is Ra tying the thread back to what Jesus said, but Jesus is tying the thread back to something in the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, they refer to the wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament. I looked at all the translation. There was no use of the word sun in the Old Testament. Jesus picked the word sun. Firmament usually means the expansion, the heavens or the sky. But I thought, isn't this interesting that Jesus wanted to say something about the sun happening in the harvest, that the righteous shine forth as the sun shines forth? Could that be a reference to some type of solar event that Jesus even knew about? So there are three levels of beings that are helping with harvest. One is the angelic level, which could, in our terms of the word angelic, that generally means the inner planes, metaphysical planes, or the higher self, the beings who aren't showing up in person. But the Confederation are the beings who can show up in person, and those are also the beings of the Confederation are helping us by, quote, standing in the small places at the edge of the steps of light. And that is, I wish he would have asked, Don had asked more about what do you mean by the small places at the edges of the steps? Because that could either mean they're coming down here or not. What does that mean? The third group watching over this process is the group you call guardians, who are from the octave above our own. This is the next universe. This would be the sphere beings. The guardians provide precise emissions of love, light, love, and exquisitely fastidious dissemination of discrimination, pretty confusing, so that the precise vibration of each entity is ascertained. They're helping out the other guys. They're giving the disseminations of discrimination, because there's a lot of decisions that have to be made about how to properly interact with people and things like that. So what's up with all this mystery anyway? Why do we need such a profound sense of mystery? Well, this is one of the most beautiful explanations in the entire Law of One material. When Don asked, why is it that we come here and lose our memory, lose understanding of everything going on? Well, let's give an example of the man who sees all the poker hands in a poker game. He knows the game. It's child's play to gamble. It's no risk. The other hands are known. The possibilities are known. The hand will be played correctly, but with no interest. It's not very fun to play when everyone is showing you their cards. But in the metaphysical planes, you can see all these cards. It's all open to the eye. And in the fourth density, there's no deception, no desire for deception. And you can accomplish things in harmony in that other parallel reality. But you gain little polarity, little service to self or service to others orientation from that kind of interaction. But let's apply this analogy and do the longest game you can imagine in a lifetime. The cards in our life that we get dealt are love, dislike, limitation, unhappiness, pleasure, etc. They are dealt and redealt continuously. You may, during this incarnation, begin, and we stress begin, to know your own cards and to begin to find the love within you. You may begin to balance your pleasure, your limitations, etc. However, your only indication of other selves' cards is to look into the eyes. You cannot remember your hand, their hand, perhaps even the rules of the game. This game can only be won by those who lose their cards in the melting influence of love, can only be won by those who lay their all, their pleasures, their limitations, they're all upon the table, face up, and say inwardly, all of you players, each other self, whatever your hand, I love you. This is the game. To know, to accept, to forgive, to balance, and to open the self in love. This cannot be done without the forgetting, because it would otherwise carry no weight if we didn't have this kind of jumbled chaos of mess to learn through. Synchronicity is a way we do put some pieces together, which is very interesting. It's one of our greatest hints about what's really going on. If you're paying attention, this is a way to operate in a discrete way without violating our free will. They say, consider the coincidences and odd circumstances by which one thing flows to the next. Consider this well, because every entity receives the opportunity that everyone needs. Somehow, things line up for us that we can figure out what's going on if we're paying attention. We can figure out what we need to progress. And they also say thoughts increasingly become things as we move into the fourth density energies. And this relates to the vibration of the photon. All particles are increasing in frequency, and this is happening, and this influence has begun to cause thoughts to become things. You can observe an example of anger. Anger causes cancer. Anger results in the cells of the physical body going out of control. So if you're bottling up your anger, that's, they say very directly, is a cause of cancer. If not the cause of cancer, because everyone gets frustrated at some things. Synchronicity is much easier to explain when you understand that this is coming from thoughts, and it's not materialistic kind of thing. Because, I mean, it's really hard to explain some synchronicities. It's just being thought into reality on some level that is way beyond determinism, materialism, that kind of thing. And they even say that our minds create realities when we're daydreaming. We can actually just, and they say this is a very large subject to talk about thoughts becoming things in other densities. If we have a contemplative general daydream, this may enter the infinity of possibility, probability complexes and occur elsewhere. So be careful what you daydream. If you're daydreaming something, it might actually happen. It might happen relating to you if your thoughts are more attracted and connected to you. But if it's just a random thing and it's no particular attachment to you, then it doesn't necessarily occur to you. It can occur elsewhere too, though. So, I mean, that right there, only if things came from thought would this make any sense. So this is strongly indicating that thoughts are the fundamental nature of reality and all physical material is just somehow a manifestation of some lower layer of mind. They refer to the unconscious mind as a journey too rich and exotic to describe. When they're talking about dreams, they say the nature of the unconscious is the nature of concept rather than word, and to penetrate the veiled portion of the mind may be likened unto the journey too rich and exotic to contemplate adequate describing thereof. So I put up a picture of Dr. Strange here because that movie did a pretty good job of explaining just how trippy things can actually be. And why am I talking about this? I wanted to talk about synchronicity a little bit more because of how it relates to the bigger picture of what's going on with disclosure. Carl Reckert specifically chose this image as the logo of the L&L Research Organization. This is Don Quixote, Sancho Panza, an illustration by Picasso, I believe, and this book, that came out recently called Tilting at Windmills. This is the most famous story. This is what attracted Carl to the Don Quixote story as a significant symbol. And the idea here, if you're not familiar, is that Don Quixote is this kind of wild, crazy fool who thinks he's a knight. He's got a lot of virtues in him, and he's interested in slaying the enemy. He sees a giant windmill, thinks it's a giant monster, and goes to fight the giant monster, which is ultimately an illusion. So this image here is rather significant, possibly even to Ra, because Ra may have guided Carla to say, this is an image we're okay putting on our material. This is the image that will represent everything about what you're doing, is tilting at windmills. And the fool archetype of Western literature is Don Quixote. He's the classic image of the fool. And this connects to the Tarot, which was also discussed in Law of One extensively. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Make sure I'm good on time. Okay. Carl Reckert, by the way, died on April 1st, April's Fool's Day. And Dave Wilcock wrote a good article shortly after that talking about all the connections between the fool archetype, Carl Reckert, and himself. The fool archetype is totally embodied by Don Quixote, and it's totally represented in the ancient Tarot. Carl Reckert chose this as the logo, and Don Quixote, well, you get the idea. Let's move ahead. This is a connection I made. How many people remember this guy from the video of the Disclosure Project May 9, 2001 conference? Does anyone remember this guy? Very few people remember this guy. John Cipher. This guy played Don Quixote on Broadway in the original 1965 performance of Man of La Mancha, which is kind of like the modern revamp of the Don Quixote story. And this is the guy who came out in Stephen Greer's big unveil of the Disclosure Project. This guy comes out singing from the musical. And I'm thinking, what are you doing singing a song if you're trying to give credibility to the UFO topic? But he's singing from words of Don Quixote, to dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave do not go. And then he says, Stephen Greer is running pell-mell where the brave do not go. He's saying Stephen Greer is the real Don Quixote in this situation. And I thought this was pretty funny because it's basically tying the thread to one of the most significant disclosure events and saying this is ultimately about tilting at windmills too. And also another interesting thing about this guy, John Cipher, is he actually was married to Carol Rosin, which is like Greer's main ET false flag witness. He's still married to this woman who Stephen Greer constantly talks about. I thought that was a funny connection. When he says Stephen Greer is running pell-mell, I didn't even look at the word pell-mell. It means to run in a confused rush or disorderly manner. So if you're looking at this from another context, you're thinking this guy's making fun of Stephen Greer. He's running around in a confused manner to get to disclosure. But this is quite profound to me that this Don Quixote archetype was so significantly represented by the introduction of the Disclosure Project to the world. And then, of course, we have David Wilcock connecting very strongly to the Don Quixote archetype, as he talked about in that blog article I just mentioned, titled The Graduation of Carl Reckert, something like that. David Wilcock, obviously there's a strong connection between him and Edgar Cayce, and Edgar Cayce prophesied his own return in some sense, that he would come back in 1998, and coincidentally David Wilcock came up to Edgar Cayce's organization, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the ARE, in 1998, and he said, hey, there seems to be all these connections, or other people are noticing connections too. The astrology is amazing. If you haven't, I mean, obviously, if you're skeptical about this, the astrology is a way of statistically analyzing. It's not just like a facial comparison. It's something you can actually dig into with numbers. So the ARE coincidentally was putting on the Man of La Mancha musical in 1998. I think it's the only time they did that. The same musical that John Cypher was the very first, he was the understudy for the very first Don Quixote, and he eventually went on to play Don Quixote on Broadway. So that musical, the ARE, Edgar Casey organization, was putting it on for multiple showings, and they gave David Wilcock a job selling candy bars. And this was David Wilcock's big unveiling to the community as Edgar Casey, as he's doing the job of the lowliest job. And he said that as I went through showing after showing of Don Quixote, I was feeling increasingly disrespected and denigrated. Cutting and humiliating statements were being made. They're making David Wilcock into a literal fool while they're putting on the fool archetype performance, and they're not seeing any connection, like I'm trying to imply right here. So I've got a thread going here. So it seemed like there's some kind of great unveiling with Stephen Greer, Dave Wilcock. Do we have anything with Corey Good that's quite interesting? And I discovered something I'd like to share. I first heard about the Blue Avians, maybe some of you did, on February 25th, 2015, when David Wilcock was on Coast to Coast with George Norrie. In the last 30 minutes, for the very first time, David Wilcock announced the appearance of giant spheres, the quarantines being enforced around the solar system, and the Blue Avians. He basically gave the fundamentals of Corey's testimony February 25th, 2015. It blew my mind when I first heard it. And it's pretty trippy to first hear that. But coincidentally, this was also on my mind. 3 days prior, on Sunday, the 87th Academy Awards occurred, 3 days prior to Dave Wilcock announcing this, when Birdman won Best Picture. And this one also the original screenplay Oscar and the directing Oscar for a man named Alejandro Iñárritu. And let's talk about this movie Birdman for a little bit, because I think this is kind of something it's profound synchronicity worth looking at. You've got this guy, the main character, being followed around by a blue bird that only he can see, talking to him. He's got a golden triangle on his head. And the director himself, Alejandro Iñárritu, was saying, I see this guy as a Don Quixote. This whole, the structure of this film is built around the story of Don Quixote in some ways. And the reviewers independently made this statement too. Reviewers independently compared this film to the Man of La Mancha, or to the Don Quixote story. And this guy also does apparently paranormal things in the movie. It's not even really talked about in the movie. It's just kind of like hinted at. You see these paranormal things happening, and then he's back to normal life. And you don't really get an explanation ever. What's up with all this weird stuff going on that only he knows about, only he can see? And the ending is a tease. I won't go into that. The play within a play, which is inside of this, is also part of one of the Don Quixote stories, and the Man of La Mancha musical is a play within a play idea, the idea of levels of reality, and the play that he's putting on inside of and the story of the movie is this guy's putting on, he used to be Birdman as a superhero, and now he's actually trying to gain respect and really be respected and put on a Broadway musical. He's putting on something called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. So he's trying to get across this message of love by being this valiant hero of a different type. The central theme of this movie is very much interwoven layers of reality. This is a trip. You can't watch this movie only once. You have to watch more than once to pick up on some of this. The funny thing is that even the actor here, Michael Keaton himself, played Batman, and that was part of the joke, is that he's going through the same thing in real life that this character is going through in the movie, and then this character in the movie is putting on a performance where he's playing another character going through the same kind of thing. And so it's like we're forced with this movie to think about, okay, are we actually in this movie too? And so many things about this movie I could talk about. But yeah, another funny thing is that he's not considered a real actor because of association with comic book. He's not credible. He's associated with this comic book thing. I thought that was a funny synchronicity too. But yeah, when Roger asked me to put up this website, comicdisclosure.com, for the comic book, he told me to put in this phrase, that whistleblowers are like the modern era superheroes. So immediately I made this connection to the movie. Oh my gosh. So we're connecting Knights, and the reviewers of the Birdman movie made the connection between Knights in the old story, Don Quixote, superheroes in the present, the way we are so into superhero films. And now Roger's made the connection to whistleblowers. It's like it's all tilting at windmills. And also I saw a UFO right after first watching Birdman in 2014, so I knew there'd be some kind of significance I didn't totally understand at the time. And of course, in this movie, we've got the producer character, exactly like Sancho Panza, exactly like Roger. Zach Galifianakis is Roger. But another point of this that we should point out, Ra is super, super sensitive about revealing themselves in any very direct way. They're teasing us with synchronicities like this. Because when they actually appeared to people in person, we discovered that for each word we could utter as a physical, being to people, there were 30 impressions we gave by our very being, which confused these entities we had come to serve. So they had to remove themselves, and they had to spend much time attempting to understand how best to serve those to whom they had originally offered themselves in love and light. So it's complicated. They couldn't immediately figure out, how can we get through a message? We can't just directly show up because people get so confused. But they also call the fool archetype their great breakthrough. Ra was said to have originally evolved in Venus billions of years ago, and they used the tarot extensively in their own form, symbols. And the one thing that they didn't have in their original development of the tarot was the fool archetype, card 0 or card 22, which they also call, in the material, they call it the choice. They say this is the unifying archetype that they didn't previously give proper attention to, but this is very important for efficiently using in order to promote evolution, to understand this guy here is blindfolded, and he's kind of able to go either way he wants without having the sensations affecting his decision. It's something within him that's just choosing. That's the idea of the choice, choosing without something else making you make that thing happen. It's totally free will. One great aspect of this archetype is the aspect of faith, walking into the space without regard for what is to come. This is, of course, foolish, but is a part of the characteristic of the spiritual neophyte, stepping out in faith. So that's another big part of this fool archetype, is stepping out in faith. Corey Good, David Woodcock, Stephen Greer, everybody's stepping out in faith. We don't know what's going to happen. The polarization or choosing of each mind-body-spirit complex is necessary for the harvestability from third density. So it's the choice that we make here which the universe kind of pivots around. All the beings who are making their choice to serve others or serve themselves. This is the nature of the ultimate choice. And the choice to love and serve others is our path back to the Creator. So Ra didn't use the tarot like we use the tarot. We use it like divination. You do a reading and you put out the cards and pick one or whatever. I don't do that myself, actually. Ra recommended, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, I'm saying Ra recommended in their original teachings that you should study the images primarily. And once you study these enough, then you can learn to become each archetype, and most importantly, to know with whatever's happening, when the adoption of a particular archetype's persona would be spiritually or metaphysically helpful. So you don't have to randomly pull out a card, you just know them all in your head and know how it applies to what's going on. And they also have kind of a series that they gave for studying, and they give all the numbers of what to study, when and how. But they gave the idea that the fifth card in each set of 7, which they call the significator, I'll talk about those, was left unpaired initially because it gets paired with the archetype 22, the Fool. So significator represents how we find significance in our experiences. And once we have significance, we pair that with the choice to love. So that's a very important understanding for how we use the choice, is we're using it when we have significance. When we have found significance in experience, then we choose love in that moment. Thanks. The 7 series of 7, maybe people can study this on their own. They call them the matrix, potentiator, catalyst, experience, significator, transformation, great way. So, there's 7 times 3, body, 7, mind, 7, spirit, 7. And the matrix is kind of like the fundamental foundation of what we go through. Consciousness of the matrix of the mind is called consciousness. The potentiator of the mind is called unconsciousness. It's reaching out beyond just empty consciousness towards something deeper about the nature of reality. Catalyst is everything that leads to experience. So you guys are kind of a catalyst right now for me. My experience is the actual thing we understand more directly, but everything that's leading to an experience is the catalyst. So I think that's clear enough. The significator is what comes after experience. Always recognize that experiences can just sit there and not mean anything until we find significance. And in the same way that every catalyst, everything that happens around us, I'm not necessarily feeling the feel of my tennis shoes right now. That's a catalyst I'm not necessarily experiencing. But once I experience something, then I have the opportunity to look for significance. And the significance is what we pair with the choice to lead towards transformation, which is a cause result of the choice. And we can look at the images to understand these better. I won't have time to go into the images. This is a massive teaching in the book 4 of the material. And then finally, the great way archetype comes after transformation as a way of painting the picture of everything that's going on that just happened. You can kind of appreciate the lesson properly with the great way. And I'm going to explain the archetypes of the spirit, as this has a unique connection to, I think, the eclipse event, and the metaphor of the eclipse. So duality is essentially a fundamental foundation of all of our spiritual evolution. They say that the matrix of the spirit is the devil because having darkness as the foundation allows the light to be apparent. So the deepest darkness exists at the start and of the role of the spirit, and then the potentiator of the spirit is seen as the lightning-struck tower, which is a sudden awakening. And they say the fructifying influence of the light upon the great darkness of the spirit is very often not as apparent as the darkness itself, but it's the light that we're looking for. The devil is the matrix, the lightning-struck tower is the potentiator, and the catalyst is called hope or faith. Moonlight is the experience, the sun is the significator, judgment is the transformation, the world is the great way. These are so complicated to really drill into, but I want to get to the sun at least, because that's what we can recognize within the eclipse. The lightning-struck tower is like a light switching on in the darkness. This would be, anything happening that just sort of like, whoa, I kind of starting to get something. What's going on? This is a sudden awakening, illuminating. We get this all the time without always recognizing. It can be connected to our thoughts. It doesn't have to be connected to our thoughts. This is spirit is independent of mind and body. It's a fundamental, less easy to perceive, subtle aspect of our nature. The original potentiator was seen simply as lightning, and then catalyst was usually called hope, but they say they prefer to call it faith. And we understand faith, and that's the star. There's a star there. That's a pinpoint of light in the sky. The adept can pick and choose what to pursue further when you have the catalyst. So this tiny pinpoint of light in the sky, well, I'm going to pursue that light. I'm going to see what that light really represents. And then you get experience. You get a brighter light, which is the moonlight. But the moonlight also is kind of representative of shadow. We're groping around in the moonlight, they say. By far the majority of adepts, even those most advanced among us, are groping around in the moonlight. And that this light can deceive as well as uncover hidden mystery. So we're looking for the hidden mystery, and the service to self-oriented people are looking for deception in the spiritual experience. The power of falsity is as deep as the power to discern truth from shadow. And we're looking to discern truth from shadow. And that would be the sun. The sun would be that entity which either radiates or absorbs the love and light of one infinite creator, radiates to others. So they say, few there are which are successful in grasping the light of the sun. And that means that there's a lot more we can be doing to recognize our inner light. Difficulty knowing how to best explain this, but contemplating the difference between the star, the moon, the sun, tells us a lot about our true nature, the true nature of spirit. Because what is the sun? It's this giant, glowing, seemingly with infinite energy, incredible thing that powers all life. And this is the fundamental nature of the spirit. This is where we find the significance of the moonlight that was the experience. You know, the moon is just reflecting the sun's light. All of us are reflecting the light of the Creator. Well, what is the source of that light then? It's worth meditating on. They say, obviously, you want to pair the significator archetype with the fool, the choice, which is the choice to love and serve others. So when you have that brilliant light that you're recognizing, remember, that's what it's about. So what would Eclipse be teaching us? It's the alignment of the moon and the sun. The experience is coming to the significance of the experience. This forces us to review the significance of all our spiritual experiences and the profound light that's always possible within us. Don Elkins asked, is it possible to help an entity reach fourth density in these final days? And Ross says, it is impossible to help another directly. It's only possible to make catalyst available in whatever form, the most important form being the radiation of realization of oneness with the Creator. We cannot offer shortcuts to enlightenment. Enlightenment is of the moment and opening to intelligent infinity. It can only be accomplished by the self, for the self. Another self cannot teach, learn enlightenment, but only teach, learn information, inspiration, a sharing of love, of sharing of mystery, a sharing of the unknown. That makes the other self reach out and begin the seeking process that ends in a moment. But who can know when an entity will open the gate to the present? Open the gate to the present. And one other idea I want to throw in there is that acceptance of self is extremely critical to get to this point. The indigo ray, the higher energy centers, only open through considerable discipline and practice, having largely to do with acceptance of the self. This simplifies what we think we ought to be doing if we understand it takes a lot of discipline to simply to accept yourself. Not only do we accept ourselves as the polarized and balanced self, you know, the polarized means seeking to serve others, balanced self, no blockages, but also acceptance of ourselves as the Creator, an entity of infinite worth. And this begins to activate the higher energy centers. Acceptance of self, forgiveness of self, direction of will. This is the path towards disciplined personality. Your faculty of will is that which is very powerful within you. You cannot ascribe to the faculty of will too much importance. So I'll end this with saying this beautiful way that Rob often ended things. This is also something from the Birdman movie here. We leave you in the appreciation of the circumstances of the great illusion in which you now choose to play the pipe and timbrel and move in rhythm. We are also players upon a stage. The stage changes. The acts ring down. The lights come up once again. And throughout the grand illusion, the following, there is the undergirding majesty of the one infinite Creator. All is well. Nothing is lost. Go forth, rejoicing in the love and the light, the peace and the power of the one infinite Creator. I am Ra. So that was my presentation there.